Garrigan, could you bring us 2 coffee makers, please? The sentence echoed in the strategic briefing room of the Naval Strategic Operations Command at Fort Ridge. About 20 men in Navy uniforms were seated around a large lightwood conference table. On the walls, satellite maps and operation plans were displayed, marked with colorful annotations. The air was tense, heavy with the smell of fresh paper and cold sweat. Before diving into this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're from, hit like, and subscribe so you don't miss anything. All eyes turned to the woman who had just entered through the side door. She wore civilian clothes, black pants, an olive green shirt, a simple jacket with worn seams. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, her face impassive, almost closed. She was in her 30s, slim, upright, without any need to justify herself. Colonel Ryan Mirror, head of a Special SEALs unit, rose from his seat. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform impeccable, silver insignias gleaming in the light. He gave an arrogant smile. I suppose you're the new civilian interpreter or liaison officer. We need black coffee, no sugar. A few officers laughed quietly, others exchanged knowing glances. The woman remained silent, motionless. Mirror frowned, stepped forward, his voice tinged with impatience. Is everything all right? It's not that complicated. She looked him straight in the eyes. No anger, just an old fatigue, almost pity. At the far end of the table, a young lieutenant murmured to his neighbor about who had invited her. Another, still in training uniform, gave a mocking smile. Maybe she's from the personnel committee or a diversity program. Then the main door opened. An admiral entered, followed by 2 protocol officers. His clear voice cut through the whispers. Everyone stand to welcome Rear Admiral Claire Donovan, commander of the Naval Strategic Operations Command. Silence. Time seemed to stop. Mirror blinked and turned slowly, his face going pale. The woman moved forward calmly, pulled a folder from her jacket pocket, and approached the podium. 3 stars now shone on her shoulders. Clearwater Naval Base, Florida, 05. The fog still hung over the bay when Claire Donovan, then just a commander, loaded her bag in the back with a black .44. No escort, no protocol. Just her notes, and an order. In OR2 camouflage uniform, she blended among the Marines and SEALs moving around the base. Her hair pulled back, eyes alert. What no one knew was that she was about to embark on a mission that wasn't on any official schedule. Vice Admiral Porter had just announced his retirement, and the command rotation would be confirmed any day. Officially, no one knew yet who would take over, but Claire already carried the presidential decree in her folder. Classified. The past few months had been tougher than she wanted to admit. Not a careerist, not a public relations favorite, even less a figure of the old guard. Her path was made of secret missions, classified reports, and decisions never spoken of publicly. But this time, leaving Clearwater had nothing to do with a promotion. She had received an anonymous handwritten note. If you want to save the NSOC, start at Fort Hamilton, before it's too late. No address, no signature, just those words. A trap, perhaps, but Claire knew how to read the signs. Behind the uniforms, the chain of command had been cracking for years. Biased promotions, suppressed complaints, unresolved investigations. Everything was recorded. Nothing was punished. She started the engine, glanced in the rearview mirror. Her eyes betrayed weariness, not from lack of sleep, but from years spent proving that competence is not measured by the volume of one's voice. Engine on. Fort Hamilton awaited, unaware of what was coming. 2 days later, Claire Donovan watched silently from the glassed room overlooking the training field. Below, a group of recruits practiced urban combat. Noise, confusion, shouting. She said nothing, took no notes, but her gaze cut like a blade. Beside her stood Lieutenant Commander Ethan Price, officially assigned to advise her on technical matters. In reality, Claire knew he mainly served as an unofficial relay for old internal alliances. These circles of officers still clinging to their privileges. He spoke quickly in a falsely professional tone. Here, we place great emphasis on team autonomy. Each group leader chooses their own training method. It has worked for years. Claire nodded slowly without saying anything. Price continued. Most of our instructors are decorated veterans. Colonel Ryan Merrifield from this afternoon. He is highly regarded by the men. That was the name she had heard whispered several times before her arrival at Fort Hamilton. Colonel Ryan Mercer. A man who had shown courage in the field but whose name kept appearing strangely often in internal reports. Intimidation, authoritarianism, selective promotion. Nothing ever proven, always just below the threshold of an official investigation. Claire turned her gaze from the window. Show me his latest mission reports, as well as the list of officers he has promoted over the past 3 years. Price hesitated. Admiral, I'm not sure you asked. Lieutenant Commander, she replied calmly. I ordered it. Silence. Price saluted briefly and left the room. 2 hours later, Claire worked alone in a small windowless office at the back of the administrative building. Piles of files were stacked in front of her. She sifted through them page by page, without pause, without coffee. Gradually, a pattern emerged. Brilliant officers, often Latino, Asian, or simply women, sidelined despite excellent evaluations. Incomplete mission reports. Incidents never reported, and then a handwritten letter, with no address, no signature, simply signed by junior grade Lieutenant Marcus Rivera. The message began, if you really want to know why our best men disappear, look closely at the night brush mission last winter and ask yourself why no one talks about it. Claire slowly closed the envelope. Fort Hamilton was not an easy assignment, but now she knew this was no longer just about command. It was about truth, and she intended to bring it to light. The meeting room in Building C was full. The chairs were occupied almost exclusively by men in combat uniform. Instructors, team leaders, technicians. At the head of the room, Colonel Ryan Merrifield, standing with the posture of someone who had not been contradicted in a long time. Ethan Price, impeccably shaved, wore that satisfied smile of those who had spent too many years in the same post without ever being challenged. In the back, Claire Donovan sat incognito. Officially, her rank of admiral had not yet been announced at her own request. Officially for operational assessment reasons. Unofficially to see how these men behaved when they thought no authority was watching. Merrifield spoke, ignoring her presence. Lately, I hear there have been irregularities in our training program. Let it be known. Those who doubt our effectiveness are free to join the administration. Laughter erupted, pats on shoulders. Claire remained impassive, observing. She mentally noted who laughed, who remained silent, who cast nervous glances. Merrifield continued in a harsher tone. Some criticize our selection procedures. Mostly, these are those who failed them. Silence. Then his gaze finally caught Claire's. He seemed to notice her for the first time. A crease appeared on his forehead. He stepped 2 paces closer, extended his hand toward her and said, Glad to see we have guests from the administration today. Maybe you'll help take notes or serve coffee. Applause. Claire did not respond. She raised an eyebrow slightly, fixed him with a sharp look, and simply thought, test passed. That evening, in her temporary lodging, Claire Donovan took out the envelope marked Night Brush. She had already tried several searches in the databases, but the operation's name had been erased, hidden, erased again. But Marcus Rivera had left her a trace. A USB key slipped behind the lining of a file in the tactical training database. She connected it to an isolated computer. One file, a blurry video captured by a shoulder-mounted camera. Snow, confusion, panicked voices, then a clear phrase muffled by breathing. They sent us in without cover. For the colonel, it was just a test. Claire leaned back in her chair. The silence became almost deafening. She now knew what she had to do, but before acting, she would observe. The ceremony was scheduled in 2 weeks. Ryan Merrifield would see nothing coming. The day of the handover arrived sooner than expected. In the Grand Hall of the Naval Strategic Operations Command at Fort Ridge, the crowd pressed in. Senior officers, Department of Defense representatives, journalists from Arlington and Baltimore, Navy veterans. The room gleamed with deep blue and gold. On the walls, flags hung perfectly, and on the stage, the naval emblem. In the front row, Colonel Ryan Merrifield, all smiles, stood beside Captain Howard Kinn, acting deputy commander. Mirror radiated confidence. Rumors had been circulating for weeks. He would be the next commander. "I'll be frank," he said to a colleague with a wolfish grin. "The promotion is just a formality." But no one yet knew who would actually take command. The invitations had only one sentence: "The new commander will be present in person." A few minutes before the start, a woman entered quietly through the side door, in civilian clothes, no insignia, no badge. Some officers vaguely recognized her. "Oh, the protocol secretary," murmured a lieutenant. "The coffee one," added another, amused. No greetings, no sign of respect. Claire Donovan walked calmly between the rows. Her steps echoed softly on the polished floor. Press cameras briefly turned to her, then forgot her immediately. She moved to the side of the stage where a pristine white uniform awaited on a table covered with a cloth. A sergeant stood silently nearby and handed her the jacket. Claire put it on slowly. 3 silver stars gleamed on her shoulders. The room still buzzed with conversation and muffled laughter when the master of ceremonies approached. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stand to welcome Rear Admiral Claire Donovan, new commander of the Naval Strategic Operations Command." A breath, then total silence. Everyone turned. Mirror's face froze. His features crumbled as if the ground had given way beneath him. A young sailor almost dropped his cap. Captain Kinn stepped back. Claire stepped onto the stage. Straight, calm. Her gaze swept across the room, landing on the men who had mocked her weeks earlier. "Before officially assuming command," she said in a clear voice, "I have a question. Who among you was present in Sierra Echo during Operation Night Brush?" Silence fell, then movement. Lieutenant Marcus Rivera stood slowly, visibly nervous. The cameras focused on him. Claire gave a brief nod. Then she turned to the rest of the room. "Let's talk about the truth." It wasn't the lack of applause that struck, but the held breath of the entire room. The name Night Brush hit like a shot to the heart. Colonel Ryan Mirror's face tightened. He remained upright, frozen, but his eyes betrayed fear. Claire stood at the podium, voice steady, precise. No anger, only icy determination. "I have accessed all available mission reports. What I did not find is even more telling than what I did read." She placed a sheet on the podium, a printed map marked with a large black area. "Operation Night Brush was conducted under the command of Colonel Ryan Mayer," she declared. 5 recruits were wounded, permanently unfit for service. No investigation, no mention in the central database, no word to the families. A murmur ran through the room. Mirror raised his hand. "With all due respect, Rear Admiral." Claire turned to him, gaze cold. "You do not have the floor, Colonel." Her voice remained calm but carried a metallic hardness that cut through the uniforms. She then turned to Lieutenant Marcus Rivera. "Marcus, tell us what really happened that day." The young man stepped forward hesitantly. His eyes found reassurance in hers. "We were sent in without prior reconnaissance," he said, voice trembling. "The area was mined. We were told it was an exercise, but it was real. No air cover, no extraction planned. I myself sent the emergency call, and Colonel Mercer then said it was a character test." A gasp of indignation swept through the room. Then another officer stood. "My nephew was part of that unit," he said, voice broken. "He never recovered." Claire remained silent. She let the words speak for themselves. Then she continued, "This morning, I filed the official request to suspend Colonel Mercer. An investigation has been opened. All officers who participated, directly or indirectly, in Operation Night Brush are temporarily relieved of their duties until the report is concluded." At the back of the room, a journalist raised his camera. Claire gave a slight nod. "You may film." Mirror stepped forward. "You have no right to do this." "I am." "You were a colonel," she replied softly. She left the podium, held out her hand. "Your keys and IDs, please." Slowly, almost incredulously, Mirror unclipped his badge holder from his belt and handed it over. Their fingers didn't even brush. "I hope, Colonel, that your version of the truth will be stronger than my evidence. The silence that followed was absolute. A system had just wavered, not in tumult, but with the precision of a scalpel. Those who had once laughed lowered their eyes. 3 weeks later, Fort Hamilton was no longer the same. Training programs had been rewritten. The disclosure of the night brush file had triggered a wave of internal reports. Aggression, threats, career blockages. What had been suppressed for years was starting to surface. Rear Admiral Claire Donovan now exercised full command authority. But she did not act as a victor. No interviews, no cameras, no speeches. Every morning at 6 a.m., she joined the first training unit, silent, observant. Sometimes she said nothing, sometimes just a single calm sentence. Good soldiers don't need a stage. They need backbone. The men who had once laughed at her began to change gradually. Not all at once, but visibly. One of them, Chief Instructor Mason Grant, the loudest mocker during her first appearance, now fell silent whenever she entered the room. Then came the incident. An unannounced security test, a routine procedure at Fort Hamilton. An external team was to simulate an intrusion to evaluate reaction times. But this time something went wrong. A sniper positioned at Post 3, supposed to be a neutral zone, used live rounds, sabotage mistake. No one ever knew for certain. Claire Donovan was in Alpha Zone observing a new training protocol. The shot passed just inches from her head. Chaos erupted. Soldiers took cover. Security forces stormed the field. And in the confusion, Chief Instructor Mason Grant threw himself between her and the line of fire. "Stay behind me, ma'am," he shouted. The bullet hit his shoulder. Seriously wounded but alive, Claire rushed to him, pressing the wound with her hands. "Why?" she murmured. He gritted his teeth, gaze fixed. "Because I finally understand who you are." A few days later, she visited him in the hospital. No witnesses. She sat silently by his bed. "You didn't have to come back," he said hoarsely. "I simply did," she replied. A month had passed since the gunfire. Fort Hamilton had changed, not less active but quieter. Conversations had become more respectful, glances more attentive, and the once mocking laughter was gone. Rear Admiral Claire Donovan gave no interviews, no speeches, no media appearances, yet her mere presence was enough to transform the atmosphere. Some spoke of leadership, others simply of integrity. On the last Friday of the month, the entire hierarchy of the Naval Strategic Operations Command gathered to conclude the review cycle initiated after Night Brush. Claire arrived late in full uniform. Her 3 silver stars gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She wore no medals or decorations, only a small worn Novan insignia. She took her place behind the podium with no notes, no presentation. Her voice was calm, firm. "I have only one request. Look at the men and women you serve with and ask yourself, would you run for them or make them run for you? We are worth more than what we have tolerated. And if that is not yet the case, then starting today it must be." A dense, respectful silence followed. Outside, Lieutenant Marcus Rivera waited. He straightened, saluted. "Ma'am, the family of one of the Night Brush men wrote to me. They wanted to thank you." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not thank me. Tell their story and do not let it be forgotten again." That evening, she left the building alone in civilian clothes. As on the first day, a young sailor she did not know held the door for her. "Good night, ma'am." She nodded, offered a discreet smile, and disappeared into the darkness. Not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a woman who could not be broken and who never needed saving. A final frank, silent look, respect laid bare.